Hi everyone, it's Vesper coming to you in the daytime, as you can tell, for the first time in a long time because, yeah, I live in an apartment with paper-thin walls, literally, like, I swear they're made out of paper. And I live next to a really busy street, and there's always a lot of traffic noise, which is why I always film late at night to try and keep things quiet for you guys, but, today, maybe the traffic noise is a little appropriate, I don't know. Just think of it as background noise of Japan or something like that. Before I get started, I should probably throw out a trigger warning, I guess. And as you can tell from the title, this video is going to be pretty heavy, pretty dark. I will be discussing mental health and mental illnesses and things like that. There will be some mention of self-harm and suicide, even though I won't go into detail about these things, but if negativity and depression and things like that trigger you, you might not want to watch this video. I also want to point out that this video isn't a video that has a moral or a happy ending or anything like that. This is just me recording my own feelings while, I guess, in the process telling you a story. So yeah, don't expect there to be anything to gain from watching this video. You might not want to watch it at all. I don't blame you. Having said that, let's get started. 15 some odd years. That's how long I guesstimate that I've been suffering from depression and anxiety. And yet it's only within the past 3 or so years that I've become aware that I suffer from these things, and I've only come to accept it within the last year. Like my sexuality and gender, mental health and mental illness is something I've had to navigate and learn about entirely on my own. I've always been an introvert. Growing up, I was the kid that people probably assumed was antisocial because during recess I'd always be off on my own playing with rocks and ants or in the library browsing the books alone. And I never really made an effort to try and make friends because one, people are just meh and I didn't feel like I had anything to talk about with them, and two, it felt like trying to make friends with people would be like trying to mix oil and water. There just was no point. I've also always felt disconnected from my family for reasons that I could write a novel about. But anyway, the point is just to say that I've always been reserved, I've always been kind of withdrawn, and so while other kids were off, developing interpersonal skills and stuff like that, I was always off on my own doing something else entirely, and this might not have any relevance at all. I just thought I'd throw it out there for context. Inevitably, there came times when I was expected to socially perform and act like everyone else, be it group projects, presentations, some kid's birthday party, whatever. And eventually I learned to mimic what everyone else was doing and to act like it wasn't taking 10 times more effort to do what was taking 0 effort for everyone else. Fast forward to middle school or high school when I'd cry myself to sleep at night because of how much harder it was for me to do what came naturally to everyone else, and how even when I pushed myself so hard to my limits, it still was difficult and I still sucked at it, and how I increasingly became aware of how different I was from everyone else and how alone that made me feel. Just to be clear, I had a lot going on at that time. Things like sexuality and gender weren't even on my mind. They were more like background noise than anything else. I was much more focused on racial, familial, social, and bodily issues at that time. Now, in hindsight, thinking back on it, I realize, however, that even though I wasn't actively thinking about it at the time, sexuality, gender, those things still played a part in all of it, even if I wasn't aware of it then. Fast forward to my freshman year of college when I began to fall apart. I pushed myself so very hard to be something that I wasn't, and when I failed at it repeatedly, I just hated myself all the more. and the self-loathing and the self-disgust and the self-hatred. It just grew and grew until eventually I stopped caring about my own life. At the time, I was attending a local university, and a couple of times a month I pushed myself to participate in a local club. I intentionally put myself outside of my comfort zone, pushed my limits because I wanted to try and change myself and make friends. The result, however, was me bursting out into tears, sobbing and shaking the second I was back in my car from the self-loathing and self-hatred and the sheer effort that I'd put into those social interactions, all while still failing at it. I put so much effort, I pushed myself so hard, and the fact that I still failed at it just made me hate myself so much, and like literally shaking and sobbing, but I still pushed myself to drive and get out of that parking lot ASAP before someone came out of the building and saw the mess that I was. And so that was me driving, still with tears in my eyes, shaking, not even able to see straight, and not able to focus on the road like I should have been. And I might as well have been driving drunk, emotionally drunk, because that's what I was. Over and over I did this. I'd go to the club, I'd leave in shatters. And numerous times I ran red lights, I made really bad decisions while driving, I almost hit someone else or was almost hit by someone else. I can count the number of times I could have died or I could have killed someone else, and I can still see the faces of a particular family that I nearly had a head-on collision with. I could have easily died, but I didn't care about that. I didn't care about that at all. What I did care about was that I could have killed or hurt someone else. That was and is unforgivable. I'm still really angry at myself for that. But right now, that's not the point. The point is that I didn't care whether I lived or died. I hesitate to say that I was ever suicidal because really I wasn't. I never made any conscious decision, nor did I make conscious effort to ever try to hurt myself. I simply made zero effort to try to avoid hurting myself. Time and time again, I'd escape potentially deadly accidents by luck, sheer luck, and I'd never do anything to try and change the situation or to try to avoid or prevent those accidents. I was aware of how many times, how many close calls I had, but I just kept doing it. And every time there was almost a potentially deadly accident, but I escaped, it just made me more and more angry at myself for having come that close to dying or killing someone else. And yeah, it was a vicious cycle. Eventually I did get into an accident, totaling my car. Fortunately, both myself and the other person involved were physically okay, but mentally I spiraled out of control. My self-loathing and self-hatred and depression just grew exponentially, and for a little while I refused to even leave my bedroom, let alone the house. As time passed, I was eventually able to stand back up on my feet and redon my now cracked mask to get me through the day and act like everything was okay. But of course, I was still really depressed and still really anxious and still full of self-loathing and self-hatred. And that didn't really get better, but I could pretend like I was okay. And it worked more or less. No one suspected anything as far as I'm aware. Eventually I found ways of coping without even knowing that what I was doing was coping. Coping wasn't even a part of my vocabulary. In fact, mental health, that phrase, and mental illness, that phrase, those weren't even part of my vocabulary at all, weren't even in my line of eyesight. I was totally unaware that depression and anxiety were even things beyond, everyone gets depressed sometimes and everyone is anxious sometimes. As is probably the case with many people, Mental health issues were never discussed in my family, but I feel like this is especially the case among Black families. But I feel like this is really, really super ridiculously ironic in the case of my family because, one, my family has always been dealing with mental and developmental health issues because my sister was diagnosed as autistic at a young age. She's also schizophrenic and deals with depression, among other many things. And two, my mom is a freaking special education teacher and has been for the past 30 years. She is well aware of mental and physical and developmental health issues. Similarly, depression and anxiety were never discussed in my family or even at school at all, be it as mental illnesses or even just as mental health issues. So growing up, I did not have the words at all to even put a name to what I was going through. Literally, I didn't know that other people experience the same thing beyond everyone is sad and anxious sometimes. And yeah, I had no idea. There was no way for me to even recognize the crap that I was going through. And I find that really, 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 you might find that ridiculous watching this video now because you're aware of this stuff, but at the time, I had no idea. Literally, it took over a decade for me to become aware of this stuff, and that was after, a decade of suffering with it. It wasn't until I had the internet at my disposal that I could actually start to learn to accept and deal with the things that I was going through. For me, the road to self-acceptance was just as hard as the road to self-awareness. Because for one, even after I became aware of the fact that clinical depression and anxiety are actual things, I couldn't help but continuously compare myself to my sister and to others. And when I compared myself to others, it felt like what I was going through wasn't bad enough. It didn't count. Like, everywhere I looked, depression was constantly associated with self-harm and suicide, and I'm fortunate enough to have never consciously ever attempted or done those things beyond, I have intrusive thoughts, but those don't count because everyone has that. So even for the longest time, I continued to belittle my feelings and just think, oh, I'm normal depressed. Everyone's depressed sometimes. I'm normal anxious. Everyone's anxious sometimes. For the longest time, I trivialized my own experiences and feelings to myself. I questioned whether my pathetic emotional fits even counted as anxiety attacks. I questioned whether my unpremeditated self-harm even counted as self-harm. I questioned whether self-neglect counted as self-abuse, or whether my ridiculous disregard for my own life could ever compare with actual attempts at suicide. I know now that things like this are not comparable, that one shouldn't try to use others' experiences as measuring sticks to try and judge the validity of one's own experiences, but it took me a long-ass time to realize that. Even after finally coming to accept that I suffer from depression and anxiety, I still felt a lot of guilt. I felt like I couldn't ever let anyone know about my struggles with mental health issues, least of all my mom, because I felt like my mom already has and had a lot on her plate, especially regarding her own stuff, but also my sister, who will never be able to live independently. And yeah, my mom being a single mom. In hindsight now, I realize that my mom has always depended on me to help take care of my sister and help around the house and just things in general. And yeah, I felt like I couldn't let her down because I couldn't add to the amount of crap that she was already dealing with, her own and other people's, with my own. And that weighed on me for a long time. Like, I had to get through this on my own. I couldn't let my family know. I couldn't let anyone know, really, and I didn't even know how to talk about it with others to begin with, even if I wanted to. And so it was with a really heavy heart that a couple of months ago I did actually sit down and tell my mom that I suffer from depression and anxiety, and her response was, yeah, she's always known. And I was surprised that she told me that. But when I told her a little bit of my struggle with it when I was younger, it became apparent that no, she really didn't know the extent of it. And after hearing about how much I've struggled with it, she took it better than I would have imagined, and I'm grateful for that. But, you know, there's still a sense of guilt. Like, I have to shoulder this myself. I can't put it on anyone else. I should try and get through it alone. I'm still coming to terms with what I like to think of as the state of my mental health. I still struggle with even thinking of it as an illness. I'd like to say that my mental health has improved a lot from what I consider to be my lowest point of driving around emotionally drunk, but the fact is I don't know how much it actually has improved since then. It's just now I'm actually aware of, you know, what I'm dealing with, and it means a lot to actually be aware of it rather than just, you know, trying to ignore it and not even having a word or a name for it. At least now I have that. And back then I had no means of coping, really. I mean, I had self-preservation instincts and did what I could to try and get through it, but I wasn't really coping, whereas now I have more means of coping. Oh my god, my cold. And yeah, so that's an improvement, but aside from that, I don't really know. Now I know my limits, and I'm conscious of my limits, and I don't push them like I did back then, which is an improvement. It really is, but yeah, I still struggle with depression and anxiety to some extent or another every day, and I'm still learning, but yeah, it's a process, as anyone who's dealing with this knows, I'm sure. It's gotten to the point where I've pretty much perfected this mask that I wear. I have to wear out in public and even here in front of this camera for YouTube. Unless I slip up, people won't know that sometimes I'm actually not okay. And really, I think the mask is another coping mechanism that I have to wear because for my job I have to be energetic, I have to be genki, as we say in Japanese, and yeah, I have to be these things. I'm allowed to be pessimistic sometimes, and sometimes I am pessimistic. I can't be optimistic all the time. But yeah, sometimes you'll be talking to me and it'll seem like everything's okay, but it's not. And that's just a fact of life for me right now at this point. I'm not sure what I'll do going forward, if anything, to try and improve my mental health. I'd like to be proactive about it, but at the same time, I'm very good at convincing myself that I'm doing just fine on my own. And 15 some odd years of being on my own with it completely, I think I'm pretty good at coping with it. Do I really need anyone else's help? I'm extremely skeptical of therapy, and I really do not like medication. So aside from those two things, there really isn't anything that I can do except go at it on my own, right? Or talk to people about it, my friends and stuff, I guess. But I'm still struggling at doing that, even. Either way, I look at where I have been and where I am now, and as much as I hate myself, because the fact is I do hate myself, that's just a part of my depression, I still have to be proud of myself. I have come a long-ass way, and regardless of all of my other negative feelings, I have to try and focus on that, and I am proud of myself. And all I can do is hope that 5-10 years from now, I'll be in an even better place mentally than I am now. But anyways, yeah, thank you guys for watching this long-ass video if you made it this far. I know there really is no point to this video, but at least now I've gotten my thoughts down on video. It's immortalized on the internet, on YouTube. And as you can see from how the light has moved, the sun has moved during this video, it's taken me a long ass time to record all of this, but I did it. I'm done. It's done. It's on the internet. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys again really soon because I have another video planned. Bye.